was a cold day by Judean standards. 2 days ago, I stood and there were priests and Levites that came. They came to see John. And they asked him, they said, "Are you the Messiah?" He said, "No." They asked him, "Are you Elijah?" He said, "No." They were frustrated. They had come from Jerusalem to find, to ask, to seek if John was the Messiah. And he said, "No." They said, and they demanded of him, "Who are you then?" And John, as he's always said, he said, "I am a voice crying in the wilderness." And then he looked, as only John looks, and he pierced them. He looked at these Levites, he looked at these priests, and he said, "Make straight the way of the Lord." And that seemed to frustrate them even more. They went away and they argued. They said, "If he's not Elijah, if he's not the Messiah, then who is he? What does this all mean?" And then they went. But yesterday there's John, and he points and he says, "Here, see that man there. That is the Son of God, the Messiah. He is the one whom God anointed. The Spirit descended upon. This is the Messiah." We've been waiting for the Messiah for thousands or hundreds of years. And yet when John says, "There he is, the one who's been anointed by God," they went away. No crowds flocked. No one came. So here I stand today. I've been a disciple of John. I follow John, baptized by John with water for the forgiveness of sins. And I wait. Will this man come again? Have I been misled? I mean, here it is. We've waited for the Messiah. Since the time of the Babylonian conquest, 500 odd years ago, we've been waiting. We thought maybe the Messiah was Judas Maccabee. He won great victories. He was a great warrior. He dedicated and rededicated the temple in Jerusalem. Yes, we thought that perhaps he was, our people thought that he was the Messiah. But here we live again, under Roman rule, Roman occupation. Slaves to them. We don't own our own land. We don't make our own laws. When they want to do something, they do it. They beat us. They hold us down. Yeah, we want a Messiah. Yeah, we're waiting for a Messiah. But has John led us astray? The Levites in Jerusalem, I think they were thinking that the Messiah would be a high priest like them. A priest that would lead them through the rituals, somehow make us a holy people, but they can't see in this person that John pointed to. We wanted a great warrior, perhaps, some of our people, that would free us from the Romans once and for all. But this is a simple man. We saw him yesterday. Someone from the north. They say he's a carpenter's son of all things. Yet John says he's the Messiah. Have we been lost? Have we been led astray? Is John really a madman like some say he is? And yet, today we wait. I and another disciple, we wait. Perhaps he will come again. Perhaps he will. John says there he is. That simple man, ordinary. He looks no bigger, no smaller, no fatter, no thinner. Doesn't look any different than any of us. But I will follow. I'll seek him out. We'll see where he goes. He asks what I ask him. Where do you stay? He says, come and see. I will. He's invited me to come and see, and I will follow. That was Andrew's story. Andrew is one of the disciples of John, and he was invited by Jesus to come and see. And Andrew went. And we heard in the story today that he stayed with Jesus all day, and he was moved. We don't know what was said during that time, but he was moved. Something deep inside Andrew was changed. From a place of despair, something was changed. On Thursday last, we started a Bible study, and one of our initial exercises was actually to look at this passage and to see what we observed and what we saw. And one of the things that we saw, or actually we look at, is that there was a pattern of things that happened in this story. So the first thing that happened is John pointed to Jesus. Then the disciples followed Jesus. Jesus asked, what do you want? What are you searching for? The disciples asked where he lived or where he's staying. And Jesus said, come and see. The disciples stayed with Jesus all day, and then Andrew sought out his brother. A simple story, really, when we look at it, yet it is a story for us here today, which is also very relevant. We're getting ready for our annual meeting in probably 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks' time. We talk about, at this time of year, what are the types of things that we are doing? How are we being Christ to others, both within our church community and within the wider world? And so it's a question of, how do we invite others to come and see? And you'll notice this, everybody get a good look at this one? So Harvey and I, we meet on Thursdays. And so we talk, and so my job was to take the notes, and so this is what the notes look like. This is everything you need to know about what's happening here at Tweedsmuir, right? And like the Bible, sometimes we have to interpret it. So I'll act as the interpreter today. But you'll notice a couple of things. Number one, right down here, it's vision. And is there a vision? Does this church have a vision? And the answer is quite definitely yes. The vision of this church in this place at this time is to know Christ and to make him known. To know Christ and to make him known. There are two things and two parts in that. One is, what are we doing to know Christ ourselves? And the second part of that is, what are we doing to spread the word, the good news, to the wider community? Annual meeting. See, they connected together here. But bottom line is that at the annual meeting, it's a time for us, as Presbyterians, as this community, to say, where are we? And where are we going? What is it that we will do? And who is it that we will be over the next year? You'll notice this number 4 up here. Those are the 4 Sundays during which we're talking, as Harvey indicated this morning, PWS&D, Presbyterian Sharing. Where is it that our money, our offerings actually go? How are we involved in the wider community? It's a question of first to be able to come and see. It's a talking about what we're actually doing. Right down here, see it down there? It's quietly happening in the background. It's actually a very interesting type of a comment because it's so significant within the congregation right now. There's so many things that actually happen within this congregation. They've been happening for years quietly. Now, a show of hands. How many people here know that this congregation actually makes and distributes prayer shawls? Just show me. How many of you who've never ever seen a prayer shawl or know what a prayer shawl is? So there's an element of things happen in the background, and they're made and they've carried on for years. And there are other things, and those same things, that aren't known by everybody. Why? Because over time, new people have joined our congregation. New people have joined the congregation, and things have been happily going along, and there was really perhaps no need to invite someone to participate. Or things were happening perfectly nice, and therefore someone didn't ask because they didn't know. So there's that element of coming and seeing an invitation, which is also important as well. And that kind of comes up right here. One of the things that came out of some of the discussions over the last month or so is that there are different ministries which are occurring within the congregation that not everyone is aware of. And one of the things that Session has decided to do is create what we'll call a special newsletter that outlines all of these things. So that, as a community, we're able to, in a sense, come and see how it is that we are actually being Christ to others. What are the things, the missions that we're actually doing or have done in the recent past for the wider community, but also for ourselves internally. Some of those missions, some of those ministries are not as active as they once were. And this kind of brings us over to here. This whole area of pastoral care. One of the things that we talked about last week as Harvey was interviewed, he said, we're now as a session not as large as we once were. The ability to do pastoral care in the way that we once did no longer exists. We have to look for new ways. We have to do things in a different way so that we're able to give the care that we want to give. And so, again, it becomes a question of how do we know, what do we see, and then a question of what do we do or how do we change. Over here, you see NCD in here in terms of the natural church development process. And one of the things that we started before Christmas, if you remember, is that we formed as a small group to be able to take a look at needs-based evangelism. We've actually met a couple of times. We've talked about what's there. We've talked about what's not there as well. And as we move forward, it becomes very important to extend past where we are to ensure that the wider members of the congregation are able to also be involved in this particular event as well. So you start to see that there's a lot of things that actually occur here. One of the issues or concerns that we have as members of Session and as leaders of the church is that perhaps not everybody knows. Perhaps not everybody has been invited to participate. Perhaps not everyone feels that they've been encouraged to be part of the wider group and the wider mission of the church. One of the last things I'll just mention before I move forward is that, and Will and myself have been back and forth on email as part of the NCD questions. And one of the things that he continues to bring back and to keep center in all our discussions is that First and foremost, we are a Christian community. First and foremost, everything that we do has to be rooted in God. First and foremost, it is our spirituality and our willingness to be able to share our good news, how the Spirit has touched our lives, that will drive everything. It's interesting. Because when we look back today at the story, it was John who pointed out, and the apostle followed, the disciple followed. Did he know who? No. Probably from a place of despair, really, but he followed because he was pointed. John invited him. God invited John. John invited Andrew. And Andrew went away. Hold on to that idea, Because as we finish off today, I just want to bring us right back to that question of invitation. Now, the next couple of slides really are just going to summarize some of the things I've just said. Number one, this is the mission statement, the vision of this church, written on the wall. It's a beautiful statement. It says to know Christ and to make him known. As we prepare for our time of planning, our annual meeting, it becomes a question to ask yourself, how are you actively getting to know Christ? And then secondly, how are you making him known? How are you being a witness to Christ? To grow in faith through prayer, worship, fellowship, education, and outreach. This is who we are and what we do. To provide a spiritual home for anyone, and to be sensitive and responsive to the changing needs of individuals in our community. It's actually interesting, yesterday and today, as I read this over, it struck me so powerfully that this is what we are doing. And it becomes a question of how personally and then as a community we keep doing this in a way which we can all see and which our community can see as well. So just to highlight, quietly happening behind the scenes. As Christians, we're called to be in the community, our own community and the wider community, to quietly do things, but we have to also ensure that we know what they are. And in a sense, while we're not doing them to be recognized and to get awards, we do need to know and be able to communicate amongst ourselves so that we are aware of how and what we're doing. You'll notice our interview last week with Reverend Harvey. It was a time for Harvey to speak his vision into the congregation. And it was so heartwarming actually over the week to hear some of the comments of the congregation back. There were comments that said, that was wonderful because it made us think. There was a letter that was written that said, how do we move forward? And there was action and movement that came out. And it was a beautiful thing. As I mentioned, the series of 4 information presentations. This special newsletter that will focus on our groups and our activities. And remember the website as well. How many people have brought someone else, perhaps one of their family, perhaps a friend, and directed them to the website? Perhaps someone who's been traveling and gone to the website because of the sermons that are there. Has anyone done that? Couple. You know, again, it's a resource that we have, and its ability to invite someone else to be able to see what happens here within our congregation. And revitalization. Revitalization is actually a real interesting word. Marilyn, in conversations, we talked about praying and praying for others. And she said, we have a prayer chain. And she nodded her head, put it to the side, and said, but you know what? Maybe we haven't told everybody or invited other people to be part of this chain. So today you're being invited. Today you're being invited to participate in the prayer chain. See Marilyn, talk to me, talk to Harvey, say, I want to be part. I want to also be one of the people who prays for the people in our congregation. The people in our congregation who are, again, suffering from illness. People in our congregation who are going through times of grief. Times where they're living in despair because they're not sure what the future is going to hold. And it's a time for us to revitalize and bring back and bigger and wider our prayer chain so that we can pray for each other. So over the next month, between now and February 20th, 2 things will happen. 2 meetings will occur, and in a sense you're invited to both. The first will be really held with session, past elders or inactive elders, really to look at the whole question of pastoral care and the needs, and how we're able to respond in a way, given that things have changed, in order to be able to offer the pastoral care that's required in the community. And the second one is the natural church development. We've met as a small group, and in a sense we had a process that was set out, but as we've gone through that process, it's become really obvious that we have to go wider. We've got to open it up to everyone in the congregation to be able to input, to be able to think and answer the question, how is it that we as a congregation want to evangelize? How is it that we want to be a witness in the wider community? So over the next week or next Sunday in the bulletin, there'll be little explanations on those. And again, the invitation to participate. Because come and see is an invitation. Come and see is an invitation to know Jesus, but it's also an invitation to be Christ for others, to know Him and to make Him known. So consider yourself invited as we move forward. Which brings us to the end. Because the rest of Andrew's story was that Andrew was moved. Andrew was moved because he sat for Jesus, with Jesus. We don't know exactly what was said. We don't know the words that Jesus used. We don't know what was moved within Andrew. But Andrew was moved. He was moved in such a way that he said, "This man, Jesus, is the Messiah." Then he had a choice. He either sat down and said, "I found the Messiah, woohoo, good for me," or he did what he did and what we know. Andrew went and he found his brother, and he said with joy and excitement, "I have found the Messiah." And he said to his brother Simon, "Come and see." And he brought his brother. Brought his brother to Jesus and said, "Come and see, I found the Messiah." And Jesus said to Simon, "You're Simon, I will call you Peter." And Peter became the rock. If we think back along the pattern, you can see that this is in one sense a story about Peter's call. But we notice that it was first God that spoke to John, John that spoke to Andrew, and then Andrew who spoke to Peter. There was a series of communication there. There was a series of coming and seeing, of trusting and believing, and of inviting. And the inviting was probably the key thing through all of this. And it becomes our question as we leave today. Number one, when we ask it, do we believe in Jesus? Have we found Jesus? Is Jesus active in our daily lives? Do we notice how the Spirit moves in and through what we do? And if we do we keep that to ourselves? Or do we share it with others? If God works powerfully in our lives, do we hold this? Or do we share it with others? Are we Christ to someone else? And that's really the question. One of the things which is interesting about the story as well, right, is that Andrew stood in the morning, and it was he and a second disciple. We're told that both he and that the disciple followed Jesus to see where he lived, to see where he stayed. We hear that Andrew was moved, and he searched out his brother and brought his brother to see Jesus. And his brother was converted as well. But what happened to the other disciple? We don't know. Our question is, do we act as Andrew? Or do we sit and perhaps leave as the other disciple? Amen.